Thank you very much and good morning. It's so nice to see such a nice group here from outside. As Elizabeth said, my name is Janczy and I am a staff genealogist here. I am also a member of the DAR. And I'm very happy to be able to take part in the DAR 101 lecture series for 2017 and to give this presentation today on cemeteries and death records. I have a few housekeeping items before we begin. I would ask that all cell phones please be turned off for silence, and also to please hold any questions until the end of the presentation. Whether you are just curious about your ancestors and want as much information as you can easily locate, or you are a serious researcher and trying to prove the dates, places, and lineage of the person you believe you are descended from, you need to know how and where to research. Whatever the motivation, you will find that there are multiple types of records that are available. The question you need to ask yourself is, what record will best suit your needs? This presentation will discuss the various types of records that are available and may possibly be used to prove the data and lineage for societies such as the DAR. Our objectives today are as follows. We will discuss what constitutes a death record or a record of death. We will talk about where and how you can find these records or this information. We will also discuss how can this information be used or not used, as the case may be, for Land Society applications such as the DAR. Examples will be shown to give you an idea of the broad ranges of information that are available and the research strategies to find various types of sources. So to begin, what is a death record? In broad terms, a death record can be described as any medium that announces, records, or displays death information for any person or persons. When we speak of records, one could immediately assume that we are talking about an official document. And quite often, a record of death is in some sort of print format. It is the form it takes that we will be discussing today, and your options for finding and using these records. Death information can be found on grave markers or tombstones, in cemetery offices, or in funeral home records. Death certificates, death records, or death ledgers are official records of the death of a person in either the city and town, county, or state level. An index is an abstract of the basic information found in these records. Obituaries or death notices are found in newspapers, in books, or online, as well as news accounts of accidental deaths. Wills and probate records are not registered or entered until the person is deceased, and there may be an old Bible in your family's possession that has recorded deaths. And finally, pensions for the heirs can also contain useful information, as well as military records that are available for those who were killed in combat or while on active duty. So, how do you know what type of record you need? What you need depends on what you need it for. You may already have some records, or there may be records in the family that you aren't aware of because you never thought about it or did not require the proof, such as for a Land Society application. First, start at home. If you do not already have some of these records in your possession, ask your relatives if they have copies. You may be pleasantly surprised at how much of this information may already be available to you, and the least likely relative may have the record you need. This isn't about a death record, but my cousin had a wonderful photo of my father's baptism. Other than the fact that we shared the same grandparents, there was really no reason for her to have this photo, and I did not learn of its existence till I was an adult, as it began. Start obtaining your own copies for past events and as they happen. There is a growing trend for states to start to limit the availability of vital records. This may be good news to some, but for genealogists, it is very concerning that these records may someday not be available at all. Get your records while you can. Many records are now available online. either the actual image of the document you are seeking, an index or abstract of the record in question, or the means for you to order a copy of the record. You can find some records at your local and state repositories, either by visiting, calling, mailing in a request, or ordering online. Visit the cemeteries where your ancestors are buried and make your own photographic record. If you truly cannot find what you are looking for or need long-distance help, you can try contacting the local libraries and historical societies for research assistance. So let's talk about cemeteries. Unless you are lucky enough to have no deceased relatives, chances are that you have at some point in your life been to a cemetery. Each cemetery has its own character and may or may not be welcoming. Genealogists are known for being passionate about their work, although I have to admit I would not go this far. In fact, not everyone is comfortable visiting a cemetery, much less searching the markers for an ancestor or for the answer to an elusive question. Being prepared and realistic about what you may or may not find in a cemetery will make your visit more successful. How does all this work help you to document your lineage? If you are interested in joining a lineage society such as the DAR, the SAR, or any other lineage society that accepts both men and women, criteria has been established regarding what information must be listed and proven on an application, and what is considered acceptable proof. The DAR requires complete dates and places of birth and death for the first 3 generations. That's yourself, your parents, and your grandparents. And at least one date and place of birth, or one date and place of death, per person in each generation, from generation 4 to the ancestor. The expectation is that the best possible record will be submitted to prove each event. Vital records and obituaries are preferred in documenting date and place of death. But other forms of documentation may be used if such records aren't available or they don't exist, and those types of records are reviewed in context with each application received. For example, photos of grave markers. If you are thinking about using information on a grave marker for a lineage society application, it is important to know what criteria has been established regarding this type of record. It must be legible. If you can't read it, neither can anyone else. The marker must be contemporary to the event. In other words, erected within a reasonable time frame of the death and burial. And when documenting and proving lineage, only the information visible on the marker itself will be considered. So what can you expect to find on the marker as you wander through the graves and read the inscriptions? It would be expected that the name of the deceased would be engraved on the marker, as well as their date of death. Often the date of birth is listed, but this information may also appear as an age of death, which could be just a year, or it may be in the year, month, and day format. You can usually surmise from the marker that the deceased was buried where you are standing, although in some instances that may or may not be obvious, or this assumption may not be true. In the case of a female, her maiden name may also be listed, as well as her spouse, and maybe the parents of the deceased are also on the marker. If the tombstone or marker is contemporary, that is, it was erected at the time of death, this information is usually accepted and provides great clues for your continued research. Then again, you may find something like this. Or this. Now, to be fair, this woman's information is probably on the other side of the marker. Note to self, always check both sides of standing markers. Let's take a look at this interesting marker. There are 3 names inscribed. Mr. Isaac Stevens died on his passage from New Orleans to New York, December 26, 1848, age 51. Mr. Elisha Stevens died in Houma, Louisiana, September 2nd, 1817, age 43 years. And John H., son of Isaac and Emily R. Stevens, died February 27th, 1839, age 2 years and 15 months. There appears to be quite a bit of detailed information about these three persons: their names, when they died, their ages at death, where they died in the case of Isaac and Elisha Stevens, the name of Isaac Stevens' wife, and that they were the parents of John H. Stevens. Except the markers in Fairhaven, Bristol County, Massachusetts. Were they all buried there? Were any of them buried there? Because of what's on the marker and where the marker is, this appears to be some sort of memorial marker. We don't know if anyone is buried here at all. So without additional documentation proving the deaths or the place of deaths, this might not be able to be used for any type of proof of death. This is hard to read. I will read it for you. But this is also a very interesting marker. It's also, as you can see, very large. In the center, yay, right there. In the center is the actual grave marker for Pinckney, husband of R.J. Anderson, born July 6, 1829, died December 2nd, 1910. The style and weathering of this marker indicates that it is contemporary to the event, and the information on the center stone may be considered valid. The marker to your left states the following: Pinckney Anderson, son of Captain Bailey Jr., 1788 to 1865, served in the Texas Revolution, Siege of Bear, 1835. Grandson of Bailey Sr., 1753 to 1840. Texas Roll of Patriots American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. There's more on the other side. Second grandson of John, 1724 to 1781. Died for his country during the American Revolution. Third grandson of James, 1675 to 1740. Born in Scotland, came to America in 1709, devoted his life as a Presbyterian minister. Wow. I'll bet if you came upon this and this was your family, you would be thinking, jackpot! There's my lineage, it's all there for me. Let me finish the rest of the marker. In honor of our forefathers, the 6th through the 11th generation of Andersons, 1979. Sorry. The only information that can be used as far as a DAR application is concerned is the actual burial marker in the center. The other two markers are memorials and were obviously erected centuries after at least 1 century, 2 centuries after the fact. And the information that is on them, in other words, the form this is on the stones, would not be considered acceptable documentation. The information may be true and accurate, we just can't accept it in this form. But it does give important details that will give you clues of where to research and what to look for. This marker has an additional stone lying in front. As you can see, it is a listing of their children, giving each name and the years of birth and death. There is no way to know exactly when either stone was erected. The children's listing would not be accepted for proof of lineage, but again offers some clues for additional research. Now here's a lovely marker. Husband and wife are listed. J.A. Messing, born October 15, 1865, died June 8, 1901. And Jenny L., his wife, born February 18, 1867, died May 28, 1935. I think you can probably see from the screen there the slight differences in the engraving on the stone for each event. The information on this marker is contemporary to each death and would probably be considered acceptable proof of dates and places of burial. This is an old marker. Matilda, wife of Ira Smith and daughter of Joseph and Elizabeth Youngs, born April 29, 1810, died July 28, 1861, bearing the 16th child. There is quite a bit of information on this stone. We have learned Elizabeth's dates of birth and death, the name of her husband, the name of her parents, which gives her maiden name, and that she possibly died from complications of childbirth. Let's talk about Find a Grave. This is just one of the internet sites available in which volunteers document burials in various cemeteries. DAR has very specific guidelines regarding the use of these sites. As discussed earlier, only legible information on photos of grave markers are acceptable, and it must also meet the criteria of dates for the generation in question. As you can see, there is a lot of information listed here for William Levi Bobbitt Jr. His name, dates and places of birth and death, the names of his parents, and the names of his siblings. Is there anything missing? How about a grave marker photo? In fact, at the bottom, it says burial unknown. This is what is known as a memorial page. The person who creates an entry like this has the ability to enter as little or as much information as they wish, and are under no obligation to prove what is listed on the page. The DAR does not accept any information listed on the memorial page in this format. It may provide you with clues for further research, but that is all. Similarly, adding a photo of the cemetery does not make the entry acceptable for our purposes. But, in the case of this memorial, it does list where the information about the dates of birth and death came from, gives the source. So whomever is interested in this person will have a source that they can obtain and keep for their own records. Occasionally, actual records will be posted to the memorial page. In this instance, the death certificate of George H.S. Thomas is attached, along with a photo of his grave marker. Since the death certificate has complete dates and places of birth and death, that record would be used for proof and not the photo of the grave marker, which only has the year of birth and death listed. This is a good example of why the DAR only accepts what is on the marker and not what is entered on the memorial page. Martha Smith Crosby is named with Smith in italics so the reader will understand that this is her maiden name. Complete dates of birth and death are listed, as well as the name of her husband and one child. The grave marker names several persons, including a William and his wife Catherine M., William C. and his wife Martha S., and an Inez L. We can't see it, but the surname is probably on the other side of the marker. But let's compare Martha's information on the gravestone with the memorial page. There is no mention of Smith, even though there is an initial S, and only the year of birth and death are listed on the grave marker. If the marker would be submitted, it may or may not be used, depending on what generation Martha and her husband would be in an application. Remember, the DAR requires complete dates and places for the first 3 generations. Martha also died in 1967, in which case a death certificate or an obituary should be available and would most likely have complete information. If the maiden name of Martha was required to be proven, this source would not be accepted. In addition to the grave markers, cemetery offices may have records of those interred. This can be extremely helpful, especially when no marker exists. These records could be index cards, a ledger, they can be handwritten or typed. You may or may not be able to obtain a copy because of the resources within the facility, but it is always a good idea to ask if you can take a photo with your camera or your phone if no copy services are available. If you do take a picture with your phone, you need to make sure that it is clear and legible. Funeral homes also have their own records, and many have also copies of the death certificates. This funeral home record is from May 1920. These types of records have quite a bit of information, including the date of the record, May 28, 1920, the name of the deceased, the place of death, the date of death, which was May 27, 1920, the age of death, and in this instance, the name of the father. It is important to note that only initials are used for the deceased and his father. While this record might be accepted for proof of death, other documentation would be needed to establish the identity with the full name. The amount of genealogical information that can be found in a cemetery is dependent on many factors. Grave markers are subject to the elements, and old cemeteries can be abandoned. Not every person buried has a marker. Not every cemetery has an office, and not every cemetery office has records. Being flexible and creative can be key to your successful research. If walking through old cemeteries does not appeal to your senses, there are fortunately alternative methods of determining the information you are seeking. Death certificates are usually recorded at the time of the event or within a certain time frame, so you can be reasonably certain that the date and place of death, including certain details relating specifically to the death, are accurate and true. Death certificates can be certified, and that there is an attestation to the validity of the record with a signature and a seal. These types of records can be more expensive than non-certified records, and it may also be more difficult to obtain a copy if only certain persons are permitted access. They are as complete as the information provided at the time of death and are considered to be legal documents. Genealogical certificates are those records used specifically for genealogical research. They can be less expensive, and some of the information may have been redacted, such as the cause of death. Death certificates can be purchased in person, via snail mail, and online, depending on the repository holding the records. The easiest way to find these sites is to use Google or whatever search engine you prefer, and type in something like Florida death certificates. All of the options available will come up. There are some third-party websites that will research and obtain vital records for you for a fee. Quite a few vital records, including death records, are available on fee-based genealogical research websites such as Ancestry.com and Fold3.com, or on free websites such as FamilySearch.org. This is my father's death certificate from Florida. As you can see, it is quite full of detailed information. It contains his full name, complete dates and places of birth and death, the full name of his spouse, including her maiden name, and the full names of his parents, including his mother's maiden name. This is exactly what we all want to see here. And of course, this makes perfect sense since the informant is a member of the DAR. She knows what we want. This is an example of a genealogical death certificate. As you can see, this record is missing the cause of death information, but everything else is complete. On some genealogical death certificates, You may be able to see "for genealogy purposes only" stamped across the form. This indicates that the record cannot be used for any legal purposes, but would be acceptable for a lineage society application. This is an example of a death certificate that is currently available online at Ancestry.com. This record collection is just one of many providing access to images of death certificates. On Fold 3, some Texas death certificates are available to view, download, and print. These records are also available on Ancestry.com. Here is an example of a Texas death certificate from 1910 found on Fold 3. Oh, first. There we go. This is an example of a Texas death certificate from 1910 found on Fold 3. It lists the name of the deceased, his complete date and place of death, his complete date of birth and state of birth, and the names of his parents and states of birth. This is a certified certificate of death for Nathaniel Freeman, who died February 25th, 1880 in Orleans, Massachusetts. The DAR does not require certified copies of vital records. Also, it should be noted that this information was not originally in this format, but it came from other sources. In other words, in 1880, someone was not sitting at a typewriter typing this up just like this and putting a seal on it. It was probably handwritten in a ledger. And we'll look at that in just a second. If I can get this going. Here is an example of multiple entries for death information found on Ancestry for Nathaniel Freeman. This is a death record index, center part here. And as you can see, it names the deceased, gives a circa date of birth, his place of birth, the date of his death, his place of death, how old he was at death, the name of his father, and the first name of his mother. As you can see from the arrow to your left, the scan of the record is also attached to this record. The record gives the date of death, his name, that he is widowed, his age of death in year, month, day format, his cause of death, his occupation, his place of birth, the name of his father, and the first name of his mother, and their places of birth. This record is also available on AmericanAncestors.org. As you can see, indexes do not always provide complete information accurately transcribed from the record, and they are accepted or not accepted for DAR purposes on a case-by-case basis. When using an index such as this, which has a record attached, the DAR requires that the record be submitted and not just the index. Nathaniel has other records attached to him as well. The top one is the Massachusetts Death Records 1841 to 1915, and below that is the Massachusetts Town and Vital Records 1620 to 1988. Both of these records are very similar, but there are some differences in layout. The second record does not list the birthplace of the parents. This death index for Joseph Freeman and record is also available on Family Search. And it has the same image as that was on Ancestry of the ledger. There was also a link for Nathaniel Freeman for Find a Grave that was on the Ancestry site, and we're going to look at that next. The U.S. Find a Grave Index, as pictured here on the left, This is the index right here. This is not accepted for a DAR application. As stated earlier, only the information on the marker itself can be used, and then only if the marker is contemporary to the event. You can see Nathaniel Freeman's marker here. It's a beautiful stone, and it does have complete information. Death certificates and records can be obtained from a variety of sources. Every day, new records are being added to such sites as Ancestry.com. But not every record is available online. When researching documentation for a Lynch Society or for your own purposes, always remember to look online, but be ready to go to the source if necessary. Each state has its own laws for the reporting of deaths. Depending on when or where your ancestor died, a death certificate or record may not exist. If that is the case, you will need to look for other types of records that can be used to prove the date and place of death. Obituaries are another form of reporting or informing a person's death. How much information is contained in the obituary is dependent upon the person submitting it for publication. Today, many funeral homes offer their own websites to post obituaries at no additional cost or at a minimal fee, unlike obituaries printed in the newspaper, which today can cost over $500 depending upon the number of lines. This is my father's obituary, which I can still access online from legacy.com. This obituary was posted by the funeral home and again contains detailed information, not just about his death and his family, but also his life. This obituary was published in the Monday evening, November 19th, 1912 edition of the Neenah and Menasha, Wisconsin Neenah Times. The man in question, E.L. Mathewson, is the father of a local woman in Wisconsin, and he died in Everett, Washington. This obituary also gives information about his birth, his marriage, and his children. This is a little blurry, but this is the best I could get. This newspaper notice is from 1867, giving a notification of the death of Jacob Miller, one of my ancestors. His place of death is listed near Cassville, and his date of death can be determined because it is noted to have taken place 2 days later from the previous entry, which gives a complete date. The day of death is also listed in parentheses. His age is listed in years, months, and days. No other family information is listed. For DAR purposes, this record could be used to prove Jacob Miller's date and place of death, and his date of birth calculated from his age and death. This is sadly a newspaper account of a fatal car accident, but it also includes her obituary and is quite detailed. Some obituaries from older newspapers have been transcribed and published in books, such as this example from Vital Records from Chicago Newspapers, 1833 to 1839, published by the Chicago Genealogical Society. Many such records have been transcribed and published by historical societies such as this one, and by DAR chapters. If you have read any of this, you can see that they didn't have much of a filter when they reported deaths back then. They gave all the lurid details, and in fact, on the bottom one, they gave their own opinion of how this death probably occurred. Interesting reading. Sometimes deaths are recorded in a ledger that is called a mortality schedule. This example is from Ancestry.com, the U.S. Federal Census Mortality Schedules, 1850 to 1885. This particular record is for Lisbon, Lincoln County, Maine. for the persons who died during the year ending 1st of June, 1850. It gives the name of the deceased, their age, whether they were male or female, whether they were married or widowed, where they were born, the month they died, what their occupation was, the cause of death, and the number of days that they were ill. Sometimes you can find a death notice in an unexpected source. This is a listing of the town officials of the town of Eastham in Massachusetts. This entry mentions the death of Joseph Freeman, or that he was deceased by the date of this meeting. If there was no other death record for Joseph Freeman, this type of record may be acceptable to prove the ante date of death is August 19, 1777, and the presumed place of death, Eastham, Massachusetts. This particular source can be found on our website in our genealogical research system using the GRC tab. Wills and probate records can contain useful information regarding the date and place of death of a person. If the document does not give the actual date of death, it can be surmised from the date of the will and the date of the probate or proving of the will, which takes place after the person is deceased. In cases where an exact date of death cannot be determined, a post date of the will or an ante date of the probate is acceptable. This will is found online at Ancestry.com and is the will of William Beverly of Creighton County, North Carolina, one of my ancestors. The script is beautiful and easy to read. When using wills and probate records for lineage societies applications, if the record is difficult to read, a typed transcript of the document should also be included. We can see that William Beverly wrote his will on the 6th day of March, 1777. However, his will was not proved until the December court in 1781. Without an exact date of death, this record would be used to prove a date and place of death as Creighton County, North Carolina, ante December 1781. This is the petition to prove a will in Greene County, New York. Several more documents in this man's will and probate can be found in Ancestry.com. In New York, wills and probate records, 1659 to 1999. This document provides his name, date and place of death, and names his heirs. This is an example of a transcribed will, as published in the Rhode Island Genealogical Register, Volume 10, page 52. This is the will of my ancestor, Holland Potter, which gives his name, where he was from, the date his will was written, and the date the will was proved. In addition to his living children, his will names several grandchildren, including, of the 18 grandchildren, George Herb. George Herb was the grandfather of my grandmother. Bible records can also be used to prove a date of death, although the place of death usually needs to be proven by other documentation. For DAR purposes, Bible records cannot be used for the first 3 generations and are evaluated in context with the submitted application on a case-by-case basis. Pensions and military records can often give valuable information regarding dates of death and in some cases the place of death. Here is the front page of a pension application found on Holmes Rating. This pension was applied by and given to the widow of Nathan Adams of Delaware. In smaller print below the heading is important information about this man. As you can see, the pension states that the soldier was killed at the Battle of White Plains. The Battle of White Plains is well documented, taking place on October 28, 1776. Therefore, from this record, we know that Nathan Adams of Delaware died on October 28, 1776, near White Plains, New York. Another way to find out a date of death using Fold 3 is to search Final Payment Vouchers Index for military pensions 1818 to 1864. It is exactly what it says, an index, but it may give a date of death. This index was created from correspondence regarding final pension payments for relatives of deceased veterans. At the National Archives, this correspondence is in files kept on site in D.C. and may be accessed and copied. Here is a pension application by Keziah Hurd, widow of George Z. Hurd, seeking land from his service in the Florida Indian Wars. In this affidavit, she provides the date of George Z. Hurd's death. On Fold 3, there are listings of other military records as well. This is a card from the M881 publication, which is compiled service records of soldiers who served in the American Army during the Revolutionary War. This is one of the service records for Joseph Freeman, who was a corporal in G. Webb's company of the 4th Massachusetts Regiment under the command of Colonel William Shepard. This record provides his date of death, 13 October, 1778. Since the death notation is listed on the casualties line, it could be surmised that this man died in battle. Without an exact place of death, his place of death could be listed as in service. Fold 3 also has records of more recent conflicts that are available for viewing. By clicking on the Recent Wars tabs, you will see the options available. And as you can see, there's several categories of publications, and these are listing of soldiers that were killed in these conflicts. Examples of online sources have already been provided from Ancestry.com, Fold3.com, and FamilySearch, and Find a Grave. There are other websites that can assist you in finding the information you require. This website, www.deathindexes.com, is very helpful in sorting out the various sources available for a specific place. By clicking on each hyperlink, you will be taken to another page that gives more detail of what kinds of records are available for that state, not just online, but also where to obtain copies of vital records from the source. I encourage you to explore the site and see the options that are available. I had mentioned previously doing an internet search for death certificates. Typing Florida death certificates yields results such as these. And as you can see, there's quite a bit. Some of it's duplicated. Some of them are from Florida. Some seem to be from a third party. Florida does not have any death certificate images available online, although there are some indexes available. Fortunately, Florida death certificates are very easy to obtain by going to www.floridahealth.gov. The fee for a death certificate is $5. As I mentioned, there are other third-party vital record ordering sites that are available. This one charges $15 for the same record. Death certificates through www.alabamapublichealth.gov requires a $15 search fee. And as before, a third-party online ordering site charges more. It is up to you to decide how and where you prefer to order your vital records. Just be aware of your options. And so, in closing, we just discussed a wide variety of records that can be used to prove the death of an individual. Options of where to find these records, such as your family, local and state repositories, or the internet. And how this information can be used or not used, as the case may be, for Lineage Society applications, such as the DAR, and what type of information is required for specific generations. And finally, examples of each type of record discussed was shown to give you an idea of the broad ranges of information that is available and how to find them. Here is a listing of the genealogy websites today that we discussed. It would be impossible to list every possible source for death records. Hopefully, this presentation has provided you with the tools to find what you need and to think out of the box. Any questions? Yes?
How do you evaluate when two official sources give different places of death? I'm thinking Social Security often seems to have a slightly different one, or I've run into where they died out of town and it's like the family also filed in their residence, and that's issued as an official place of death also.
You're talking about on the death certificate the family filed?
Yeah.
Well, the death certificate, as far as the place of death, is filled out by the entity. It's not filled out, that part's not filled out by the family. The information from the family is his date of birth, where he was born, the names of his parents. The rest of the information is from the entity there where the person died. So a death certificate would be considered the more accurate information. Some of the Social Security information, such as the Social Security death indexes, the place on there is where their last payment was sent. So may or may not have anything to do with where they were actually at when they died. So you have to keep that in mind. You may need to do some research and look at multiple records. If it's truly not clear where this person died, if you don't have an actual death certificate, to figure out where would be the best logical place. If you can't find an actual place of death, a place of burial would be considered appropriate as well. Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, several times I have found records in Ancestry, for example, or other places as well, like death certificates, where the record that was transcribed by Ancestry will misspell the name. So, for example, in one case, the person's name was Joe, and they wrote Toby on the record. So what I've done is I've just submitted both, the Ancestry.com transcript and the actual certificate. But I'm hoping that they'll realize what happened.
We would take what was on the actual record,
Right.
because that, again, that's considered, it happened at the time. So it's considered contemporary by someone who actually knew the person or had knowledge of what their name was. Well, as a transcript, is someone reading something as what they think it says. So that's another reason why we don't just accept some indexes. If there is a record, we want to see the record so we can compare. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yes. I had one other situation that's arisen, and that is where somebody, I guess, after the fact, crossed out the name of the deceased on the death certificate itself and wrote somebody else's name, but it's clearly not another person.
Yeah, we have to be careful about that. Some death certificates can be amended after the fact because there was a typo. The person thought it was Joseph, and it was really Josiah, something like that. And family will notice that there was an error, and they will take it back. And that may be the way they amend it. It's just to mark through it. Generally speaking, if we see altered death certificates, what we would consider to be altered, and it's clearly something completely different, we would probably ask for something else as proof. This man, you had a question?
What advice would you give to find information for someone who died maybe in the 1700s, going back 200 to 300 years ago?
It depends on where they died. If it's New England, you're in a lot of luck because there are a lot of town records in the New England area going back to the 1600s.
This would be Virginia.
Virginia. Well, I'm not the Virginia expert, but Library of Virginia does have records. You might also want to go to the county level. There may be parish records, church records, and you may not, like I said before, find an actual death record. You may have to gather the information from other documents, such as a will or a probate, a deed from the heirs. in which it states that the person is deceased, so you can get information that way. So you might need to have to kind of go around it to figure it out without having an actual death record that specifically states, the date and place of death. So there are options available: church record, parish records, local historical societies usually have a very good supply of records that are available, and of course, like I said, the Library of Virginia has a very good repository. There's also a lot of records at the Family History Library in Salt Lake City. That's not just for Salt Lake City, it's for everywhere. So you might be able to search their catalog and find something specific to the parish that you're looking for. And they may have something on my phone. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you find that some states are habitually outliers in terms of the accuracy of the records?
No, I don't think so. Like I said, other than the actual date of death, place of death, cause of death, that stuff's filled out by the physician. So the rest of the information is dependent upon the person that's the informant. So I wouldn't blame the state per se, unless every person in that state doesn't know how to fill out a death certificate, which is kind of odd. So no, I would not say that there's a particular state we go, oh gosh, a death certificate from here, it's going to be wrong. That's not the case. Anything else? Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the genealogy services that are available if you're at DAR?
Well, the library does have some search services available. The genealogy department itself, we're here just to verify applications that are sent to us with the documentation. So we do not do independent research. But the library has, have you been to the library? Has a wonderful collection. There are people there. You can copy information that's there, either from our own records or from the books. And we do have a search service that's available. If you go on our public website and click on the library, you can see the options that are available for research. Any other questions? Yes.
I have one more. Sometimes I've been able to find information in genealogical studies, like the New England genealogical, and Virginia genealogical studies. Are those considered acceptable?
Every document, other than like a Bible record and that kinds of things, those sorts of documents are all reviewed on a case-by-case basis. We look at when it was published. Are there sources cited? Would the author have first-hand knowledge if there are no sources? And just the information that's in there. So we have criteria for those types of documentation. Are you a member?
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with the genealogy guidelines? Okay. So the genealogy guidelines and the members website does discuss how we review publications and non-published information as well, and the criteria that we look for. So there is no acceptable versus non-acceptable list. It's just as it's in front of us in the context of the application, we will look at it and review it for acceptability. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much. You've been a lovely audience. I really appreciate it. Thank you.